Hey there again, and welcome to video number 2 of City of God. Here is where we get into this exciting book. As you can see, it's pretty thick, and so I have actually marked the 3 places I'll be visiting today, just in the first couple pages of the book to share with you all. So I'll be doing a little more quoting this time than last time, and that's to help introduce us to what Augustine is doing in the book. So last time we covered the thesis a little bit, but I want to quote his very beginning passage where he talks about it and then say a little bit about that. So it's book 1, right at the beginning. This is the purpose and argument of this work. Augustine says, "Here, my dear Marcellinus," and this is written to a disciple of his, a friend of his, who they've been having these discussions about, as once again Rome is fallen. "Here, Marcellinus, is the fulfillment of my promise, a book in which I have taken upon myself the task of defending the glorious city of God against those who prefer their own gods to the founder of that city. I treat of it both as it exists in this world of time, a stranger among the ungodly, living by faith, and as it stands in the security of its everlasting seat. This security now awaits in steadfast patience until justice returns to judgment, but it is to attain it hereafter in virtue of its ascendancy over its enemies, when the final victory is won and peace established. The task is long and arduous, but God is our helper." So he already recognizes that the book is going to be super long here. So notice the very first thing Augustine is setting up here. Once again, we're defending against the pagan gods, to those who prefer the pagan gods over Jesus Christ. But there's another side here where he's sort of explaining to us the political order that Christians belong to. On the one hand, there's the church manifested here on earth. That's part of the city of God. But there's the other side of it, which is this sort of folded up city, right? That exists in the future when it will be revealed. So that's the security of the everlasting seat of the city of God. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later, but recognize that sort of twofold nature of the city of God. Now you'll notice that Augustine has explained already the city of God here, but he also goes on to explain a bit about pagans. So later on page 9, he's doing a bit of a critique of the Roman gods. So people could say, it was so much better when we had the Roman gods. Before we had Christianity, it seems like the pagan gods kept us happy. And Augustine is saying, actually, no, that's not true, because people with pagan gods were conquering each other all the time, and temples would get desecrated, and the gods would get overthrown, and they were fickle, and it didn't seem like the gods were helping. Basically, catastrophe has always happened to human beings. This is not just a function of the new Christian order. He says, "What folly it is to see any wisdom in committing Rome to such guardians, and in supposing that it could not be sacked while it retained possession of them. To worship vanquished gods as protectors and defenders is to not rely on divinities, but on defaulters." So he's saying, these gods that you trusted in, they've fallen time and time again, and they will fall into the future, right? Had we been pagans still in Rome, we would have still fallen, right? And that's interesting, because it leads us to go, okay, so these gods that we've trusted in, the idols that we talked about last time, are wholly inadequate. They fail over and over and over again. Now, Augustine wants to go a little bit further than that. Back on the first page, he's not just interested in any particular god like Zeus or Hera or Apollo, and he's not just interested in what we might have identified as gods like control or stability or whatever those are. He says underlying all our gods is one subversive idol. He says this is the primary idol of the city of the world. The city aims at dominion, which holds nations. Let me backtrack a little bit. So he's saying it's a city. This is the city of the world. It's a city which aims at dominion, which holds nations in enslavement, but is itself dominated by that very lust of dominion. So it's a lust for dominion, a lust for power. Augustine will also talk a lot about pride. That's the animating force of the city of man. So underneath all these other idols, chances are there's a little bit of dominion. So that's the second thing I want you to take out. We talked about the twofold nature of the city of God, but now we're talking about the root desire of the city of man, which is for dominion. But notice that in that search for dominion, we're actually being dominated ourselves. So that's the second thing. Now, the third thing is going to be a little bit intense. So bear with me here. This is on page 13 of the City of God. I'm sure you're all following along there. Augustine says at the beginning of chapter 8 of book 1, no doubt this question will be asked. Why does the divine mercy extend even to the godless and ungrateful? In other words, so everyone's experiencing bad things. Why do bad people sometimes also experience good things? It seems like God, if he's just and he's good and he's all powerful, he's not like these fickle idols. He should be making things always good for good people and always bad for bad people, right? That's justice. He goes down a little bit, and this is his explanation. He has willed that these temporal goods and temporal evils should befall good and bad alike, so that the good things should not be too eagerly coveted when it is seen that the wicked also enjoy them, and that the evils should not be discreditably shunned when it is apparent that the good are often afflicted with them. So that we won't get too cocky, or so that we won't get too obsessed with worldly things, God is saying, hey, look, here's a reminder. These temporal goods and bads are not anything compared to that ultimate city. But he's going to go a little bit further on page 8, or sorry, on page 6 at the beginning. He says, people in the city of man attribute their deliverance to their own destiny, whereas if they had any right judgment, they ought rather to attribute the harsh cruelty they suffered at the hands of their enemies to the providence of God. For God's providence constantly uses war to correct and chasten the corrupt morals of mankind. And it also uses such afflictions to train men in a righteous and laudable way of life, removing to a better state those whose life is approved, or else keeping them in this world for further service. So Augustine's talking about providence here. He's saying, first of all, don't get too bogged up in temporal things, but also don't forget that God has a master plan that extends beyond what you do. Blessings and curses will fall on both the good and the bad, but God's providence is supreme. So there's a couple things I want us to remember. The first thing is that our ultimate allegiance, what we talk about a lot, is like, oh, our citizenship is in heaven. And that's true, right? Augustine wants to affirm that there's this everlasting seat for the saints, but also we have a citizenship here. And that future kingdom is being manifested right here, right now. So we should care about our earthly state, but also recognize that this is temporary. We're trying to mediate between those two cities, that two, I've heard it called the sort of like not yet paradox that we're dealing with. That's not the right term. Somebody will correct me. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to address is that this gives us a chance to recognize God's providence. Now, if you're anything like me, you'll resist this notion a little bit. You'll say, no, I have the ability to self-determine my life. I have control. God's providence shouldn't be so overbearing. It seems like he's subjecting me to the coronavirus or job loss or whatever issue we're facing right now, and we want to fight back against it. Well, the thing is, Augustine's calling that out, and he's saying that root desire for self-determination, that's really just that will to power he was talking about, that will to domination, that desire for ourselves, for pride. And that's really, really bad. To the degree that we're subscribing to that is to the degree to which we're buying into the citizenship here of the city of man rather than the city of God. So I think the challenge for us here is to recognize God's sovereignty over all, over not just the grand scheme of history, but over the individual things that happen in each of our lives. And I've thought of it this way, this helps me a bit, which is basically just saying, would I rather credit too much to God or too much to myself? And if I say too much of my success is mine, I'm stripping away a lot from God. But we also know that when we're trusting in God, that the calamities that we experience are ultimately under his control, and that maybe they'll serve to our edification. Augustine's hinting on that, and I'll talk about it a bit in the next video. I'm going to leave you hanging a little bit about how we deal with this sort of good and evil, both experiencing the same things, because Augustine goes further with that. But here's the application I kind of want to leave with us, and it's a simple practice, which is basically just a prayer of submission. I was listening to some news clips talking where our president was talking about reopening the economy by Easter, which, that'd be very exciting and good. And we have this drive, let's make it happen. And I'm sure if you're like me, kind of in a place where I'm not working very much right now, that's another thing. I'd love to start working again. Or maybe it's that you just want to get out of your house because your family members are driving you insane. You have this desire to self-determine your way. Augustine here is saying all of it's in God's providence. So my challenge to you and my challenge for myself is going to be not just to recognize theoretically God's sovereignty, but to pray that we would internalize that and accept that as we are living in this current manifestation of this great everlasting kingdom.